Hi, Daryl. Okay, sure.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you for speaking with us today. I'm Padma. I'll be your moderator this evening. And thank you for joining us to speak about responsible fundraising. So Daryl let me just introduce you guys to Daryl. He's the CEO of Connection Point, a crowdfunding service provider actually that has a number of platforms that allows users and companies to raise money through crowdsourcing. And Daryl, could you, just before we move on, we'll also be taking questions for Daryl via Slido concurrently, which we'll discuss closer to the end of the discussion. So Daryl, could you please start off by telling us about Connection Point and what inspired it?
Sure. And for anyone who's wondering, Patna and I have just been having a fantastic conversation ahead of getting started here. So we will try not to reference all the things that we had talked about previously, so that you're in on the joke, if you will. But as she said, I'm Daryl Hatton, I'm founder and CEO of Connection Point. We're best known for Fundraiser, which is our enterprise crowdfunding platform. And enterprise crowdfunding is kind of the most advanced digital fundraising technology that you can have now. And our goal is to help nonprofits and social enterprises, individuals, and even businesses raise money and fund the projects they need to get funded. So a big thing about what we're trying to do is see if we can change the way fundraising is done so we can not only help generate billions of dollars of funding going into projects that are really important around the world, but that we can do it for almost free. So there's a real innovation in our business model about how we do that.
Mm-hmm.
So we're here today, I think, to talk about, kind of the impact of digital fundraising and digital funding and fintech on philanthropic markets, and potentially even some overlap into how that applies to social enterprises or businesses that are operating with a bit of a philanthropic or societal benefit.
Yes. Yeah. You mentioned philanthropy a few times, and response. There has been some conversation about how philanthropy doesn't have to be responsible, and how fintech is making it, making easier for this kind of a project-backed fundraising to be better at it, do it better. So could you please tell us about how digital innovation has made things much more easier for nonprofit fundraising?
For sure. One of the best things that's going on with the kind of, first off, there's a shift that's going on in the world as we're getting more technological maturity in our population. So people are getting used to using digital devices, the internet, web browsers, things like that, to research and find the information they're looking for, and also to want to transact or do business this way. And so one of the great things is that as more people are becoming comfortable with it's becoming much easier to tell the stories that are important to philanthropy. Like a lot of the time when we're thinking about a charitable cause, we need to learn about it. We need to learn what's going on, what the problem is, and then how additional money or contribution or volunteering even can help change the outcome of that story. And the digital technologies and fintech are making that much easier for everyone involved, because it's so much easier to get a message out to a much broader community now than ever before. Even a small nonprofit can start to reach out and tell a story about what's going on in their region or in their area of the world to people all across the world. And so they can find the audience, the people that are interested in helping them out. And fintech is helping make it much easier for them to transfer funds, particularly internationally. So we are based in Canada, but we have customers in over 40 countries around the world. And so far, we've run almost 200,000 projects for all these different regions and have raised, almost $200 million worth so far.
Okay. So what you're saying is that people are no longer just donating to their communities, right? They want the impact to be global, and they're willing to actually believe that whatever their donations are is actually objectively helping these communities or the cause.
Well, yeah, there's a couple of things that you said in there that are really important. So one thing is that the donors want to know that they're making an impact. It's no longer good enough for them to say that they're giving some money and they feel good about giving money. It's that they're buying the result. They want to see that their money has made a difference. We were talking earlier about the idea that the generations in the kind of the 50s, 60s, 70s, giving was things that people did because they were supposed to. It's what good people did. They gave money to their church, they gave money to charity, they gave money to their community to help make things better. But they didn't necessarily know exactly how that money was being used. As we moved into a digital donor world, or where people are more digitally enabled, they're wanting to know exactly what their money is being used for. How much of that money went to solving the problem? And so the thing is that they're picking causes to support that tell them how much of an impact they're making. And that cause, if it's local, is best. If I feel like I'm helping, I think there's a trend that we've seen, and particularly around what's happened with COVID. With COVID impacting so many of our friends and neighbors and our countrymen or country people, at it's very clear that this is impacting all of us. The desire becomes a little bit more tribal. I want to help my friends and neighbors and those around me. So location becomes very important in giving, but it's not always the most important thing. The thing that motivates a lot of people is how much of an impact they can make. So if I'm just generally giving money to things in my community, it doesn't feel very good. But if I feel like I can help that local women's shelter protect the single women and their children during COVID, I feel really good. Like I know that if I spend $50 and I can help one woman and her child eat and stay healthy for a week, that feels really, really impactful. I feel like I made a difference. And people are wanting to look for that. So, you'll hear me kind of harp on it a little bit, but telling stories of how donors can make an impact is probably the most important thing. Location, if you add it on, is a killer value proposition, if you will, for a charitable cause. It's local to you.
Yeah. So it's about the main draw, even for because you mentioned earlier about how it's mostly just the millennials and the Gen Zs, but there's also a little bit of Gen X and boomers. And these were people, the last few categories of people were the type that, they just donated because they're good people. They didn't want, just needed to give money for charity causes. They didn't need to know whether there was actual impact. But would you say that not just that they want impact, would you say that this millennials and Gen Zs and a number of Gen Xs, they also feel responsible for the money that they're giving, or responsible for the impact that they're causing?
Yeah, I think I think there's two parts to that, and one part of it is that we see this giving behavior and the desire for this impact in younger generations very, very pronounced. It's very easy to see how the Gen X, well, Gen Z being the ones that are born around the turn of the century, and the millennials that were born, a little bit before that. There's an interesting demographic trend that they really want to make a difference in the world, and they feel empowered that they can. Even as an individual consumer, they feel like they can be the tail that wags the dog on the corporation and makes the corporation do good things. But the interesting thing is that this idea actually transitions across generations. So you can have baby boomers who are doing exactly the same thing and feeling the same way. And what we are discovering is the difference is not so much in their demographic age group, but in their level of technological maturity and their adoption. The more they're adopting the technologies to do this, the more likely they are to have that alignment of that they want to make a difference. So we can have seniors, grandmothers and grandfathers who are donating and active online, promoting their causes that they care about, using the wealth that they may have accumulated to make a big difference. So it's less about age group and more about how digitally savvy they are in the way that the way they think about the world. So I think the idea that you had in there, or the question you had, was around, do they feel responsible? And I think, I would phrase it a little differently. I think they feel empowered. So what they realize is their consumer behavior and the money they're going to contribute to causes can have an impact on the companies they do business with and how that's done in the world. So if you think about from, in a way, they're micro socially responsible investors when they start thinking about how are the things that I'm buying influencing the world? Am I buying from people and companies that are going to do well, take care of our planet? That matters to them. And in the same way, they're thinking about um, giving to charities that are trying to solve the underlying issues in an area, as opposed to fixing the symptoms, treating the symptoms. You know, we were talking earlier about the idea that a lot of the times we've invested a whole bunch of money in Africa, and we haven't necessarily felt like we've achieved as a society the results that we want in Africa.
Mm.
And part of that is perhaps because we're going in and treating the symptoms instead of the root causes of what are causing those problems.
Of course.
And the problem with solving the root causes is those are some really tough things to solve. If I give you food, it's easy. I just keep giving you food. If I try and improve the food security in the entire area, that's hard.
Yes, it
And
requires a whole lot of other type of planning, right?
planning and results and long-term thinking, you know, a lot of these things are 10, 20, 30-year plans in order to actually have them work. And we get impatient. We want to see results right now. And we get emotionally involved in these causes because we've seen the damage that is occurring. You know, we see the starvation, we see the lack of water, we see the arid fields, we see the poverty that is so debilitating.
Yeah, that's true. But so we talked. Sorry, just give me a minute. When it comes to, we talked about how cost effective. I mean, clearly this, when you think about digital fundraising, it's cost effective. So donations are put to better use. But there's still, would you say that there's still an objective to project-based fundraising? Like you mentioned galas during conversation earlier, you know, social events. There's still that ability to I mean, we are very social animals, and people still like to have contact. Does digital fundraising completely negate the need for social events, or does it is it an addition? Does it improve how you do social events?
No,
Optimize social events?
yeah, it's a great question, and it's one of the things that I think a lot of people get very concerned about. When we're talking about using digital fundraising, we're trying to encourage nonprofits and charities to diversify their sources of funding, to give themselves different ways to get money in. So it's not necessarily about throwing away all the things that work right now. If they have a program to cultivate major donors, if they have a gala where they cultivate people who will give them much more money, while that's difficult with COVID right now, they shouldn't be throwing out that whole scheme and trying to replace it with just one magic bullet of digital fundraising, because it's very difficult to do. So we recommend everyone does more of these things and tries to give themselves options on how they fund their charitable cause, because that's the reality of the world. A lot of people who were relying on galas or on peer-to-peer fundraising events like the charity walks or runs or rides found themselves really at a disadvantage this year when COVID made those events impossible, or certainly risky, very risky.
Of course.
And that people didn't want to participate in them anymore, and they saw a big drop in revenue. Fortunately, there was a countervailing effect where there was contributions coming in online that made up for some of that shortfall. But you know, I think the thing that you talked about there is that the galas and those types of events promote a lot of person-to-person relationships. And I think if you distill those down, what a lot of that is about trust building.
Yes.
That you're building trust in the organization through the people that are there and involved with it. And so as a donor, I feel like I can trust that my money will be used well because I know the people that are involved. That same thing is very important in digital fundraising. This isn't, people misunderstand social media in that they think it's a broadcast mechanism. I'll push my message out on Facebook. Facebook isn't for pushing messages. Facebook is for having conversations. If
Communicating.
done well, it's about having a conversation with the donor community and the community at large about these are the problems we see in the world. What do you think could fix it? This is what we're doing. What do you think about that? And responding and having that dialogue. And why do we have that dialogue? Because it builds trust. It helps and it communicates and educates. We learn from our donors. The donors should learn from us. That's, they're learning about a problem that exists in the world, and they're given, by that interaction with the charity, they're given an opportunity to make a difference. I did a little, try not to self-aggrandize here too much, but I did a TEDx talk on philanthropy as entertainment. And the idea that if we start giving small enough amounts of money and seeing an impact, it's a little bit, it triggers enough of the hormones that we get, the serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, and endorphins that make us feel really good. And by the way, are really addictive. Our brain loves these things. We want more of it, which is why we get stuck on our cell phone every time it dings, or we get an email message coming in, or an Instagram or WhatsApp message coming in.
Sure.
We're addicted to that stuff. Philanthropy can do the same thing. If we give small gifts, biologically, we're wired to get rewarded for that. And we get this little hit of these hormones. If we give frequently, it's addictive. And
it becomes second nature.
Yeah. And it becomes second nature. And we start assuming that we can make things better. That's got to be good for people in the world, for our mental health, for our physical health, and for our societies. When we think that we can make things better and we contribute and actually actively participate in trying to do that, it has a good result.
But would you also say that, expecting the impact, the speed of impact could also be a turn? I mean, like say certain social causes don't have immediate impact. Like say if you're fighting for poverty, you cannot elevate poverty, just by giving money. Like you said earlier, right? You need to go in, you need to think about plans, strategies, and these are things that take 3-5 years to resolve, to even just, to even see an inkling of impact, measurable impact. So then would that be negative to a consumer who expects immediacy, to donors that see immediacy?
Yeah, I mean, we're trained to expect instant results. So I can order something online on Amazon that was manufactured in Malaysia and delivered to Vancouver in 48 hours. Yeah. And it'll be here, and I'm expecting that now. Like that's a kind of an expectation. So when people are contributing to causes, they frequently will have the same kind of expectations. I want to have it solved right now. But one of the things about communicating about impact is trusting the donors and trusting them by telling them really what's going on, not posturing, not trying to sugarcoat it, and using the example of how the money was used to describe the steps that are going through the process. So, we achieved a legal agreement this week with the municipality or the area we're going to go do the work in, so we can now have our people on the ground and doing the work. That's a result that the money achieved. We may not have solved poverty in the region, but we've done a step towards it. And if the charities will trust their audience to know the reality of what it takes to do that, they will build a lot more engagement from their community. That's what we've seen. When we see charities and causes talking about the hard work that's involved sometimes and how the money has helped power that hard work, even though the final result that everybody wants hasn't been achieved yet, people go, I get it. It's a long-term problem. I feel like I'm part of that. We'll be a long-term solution. We're doing something bigger than just a little Band-Aid. And I think people, maybe I'm a bit of an optimist, and I think you are too, but that we believe that people will be motivated by those things. And I think even when we see people without a lot of money who are willing to give small parts of it, it shows how universal that feeling is. Even when they don't have a lot, they will give. I think it's very interesting. You had an article on your website about an entrepreneur. And the article is a little bit about kind of the risk and values of being an entrepreneur.
Yes.
That whole story was about how an unexpected philanthropic act from another entrepreneur who helped ensure that that one entrepreneur who was struggling got through the struggles has turned into an ongoing long-term give back to society, because that entrepreneur who was just about to go bankrupt is now
Yes.
an angel investor, right?
Yes, he is.
That's and the thing that's he's talking so much about is the story of impact, of how that help that he got turned around and he's now able to repay it. So I think these stories are quite universal and they cross business and charitable lines. We can support our businesses in the same way in that we support charities in some cases,
Mhm.
because if we believe in them, they're hiring people in our community, they're taking good care of those people, why not support them? There, there's different ways we can do that with funding, loans, and even straight outright gifts.
Okay. Um, the one thing that a lot of people, when they donate online through crowdfunding and crowdsourcing, is just that they're able to track the transfer. I mean, there's a lot of transparency that they say, but isn't traditional fundraising, doesn't also traditional fundraising ensure that? I guess it's just not in the same way.
It's much more difficult to share that.
Mhm.
And the big difference is that one of the nice things about digital fundraising is that the donor can elect to say how visible they want to be. They can just make an anonymous contribution. But the real value of it comes in when they will identify and say, I helped this project move along. I made a gift to this project. It's not about bragging how much money I gave. It's frequently about saying, I got this kind of impact, and I'm hoping that my friends and others in my neighborhood and my social media networks will want to make the same kind of impact. Because what a wonderful endorsement. I've just given up hard earned money for absolutely no return to me. I didn't buy something, I gave it away. I can inspire other people to give in the same way. And that's one of the best powers of digital fundraising is the donors can become much more engaged in the cause and can become advocates for the cause. They cared enough to give you money. Frequently, they care enough to talk about what they did. They can brag about your results as a charity for you that you could never say. Like, it's bragging if the charity says we did all this great stuff. But if your donors say they did all this great
But
stuff with the money we gave them, people are a completely different reaction.
it also motivates your community to give. Yes, your
Yeah,
network. Yeah.
yeah. So
Oh,
we've got a
yeah.
bunch of questions coming in. I think maybe we should figure out some wrap and then we can give them some time to answer, because I think some people are pretty
Yes,
interested in some
because we
answers.
can go on about this for a long time. Yes.
We
Yes.
could talk for a
So
long
I
time.
I can't really see on my side. My sorry, Daryl, I can't really access Slido. It's not loading.
Do you want me to read out a couple of the
Yeah, yes,
questions?
could you please take a question? Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm trying to. I
sure.
have to reload.
No, no worries. So we had a question come in. Fintech is definitely making it easier and maybe even cheaper, but how is it making it responsible when much of the funding is towards irresponsible areas? I'm not sure I agree with the idea that much is to irresponsible areas, but even in places where it may be, one of the things that's important about this is the transparency that Pathma was talking about there. We've got, we can show where the money is going in social media. There's more visibility of that, and that implies or more kind of encourages responsible behavior around it. So it's I think the transparency that comes in using, more public social media and fintech makes us safer because we can see where the results are going. So one of the other questions is how can organizations build trust in this segment? Most of the time, people do not part with money for philanthropy because they do not trust the
That's the
organization.
organization.
That's actually the number one reason people won't give to charity, is that they don't trust it. And that's been for a whole variety of reasons. Some of it has been abuse of the funds that have been there. Some of it has been the lack of transparency in how they've been used. And so the way you can build trust in the segment is that transparency, to show how the money is being used, and especially when a donor can see exactly how their money is being used. With our fundraising platform, we let people raise money for free. And the way we fund our operations is we trust the donors and we say, if you like the fact that we're making charity fundraising free for this charity, would you be willing to leave us an optional tip to help us run the platform? And the donors trust us in that. They're learning to trust us. So they pay us to keep fundraising free for their charity so that
Right.
more money can go to the cause. So that level of transparency is one part of it. But the other part is that we really encourage the people that are using our platform to tell the stories at a very micro level. So if you think about it, if I'm funding a major project and it costs, I'm sorry, I'm not doing this in local currency, but if it costs $1 million, if I give you 50 towards that million, it doesn't feel like I made a big difference. But if that million is broken up into 10 or 100 $1,000 projects, or a much smaller amount, my $50 towards that much smaller goal feels much more like I made a difference. And if I'm told the story about how that makes a difference, I'm much more willing to give. I've got a better value for my money, if you want to think about it that way. And so, because if you're breaking down that level, I know there's a lot more theory behind this and a lot more practical data that shows that it actually works, but it can seem counterintuitive at the beginning. If you want to get more money for an organization, ask for less. Just ask for it more often. And that the repeat and show what the money's been used for, and it builds trust. Because give you an example that happened from COVID response here in Vancouver. One of the groups that was taking care of women in what's called the downtown east side, or a struggling area of the city, their cause helps single women and their children. And during the pandemic, they said, if you give us $50, we'll make sure she has a mask and protective equipment, has food for herself for the week. So she can not have to go out and go shopping and risk getting sick. And if you give us $100, we can do that for her and her child. And when they reported back that this is how many people they were able to help over this period of time, they got a lot more contributions coming in, because people went, my money actually got used to help keep a woman safe for a week. And that kind of feedback loop meant that they increased the amount of donations that they had. Well, I mean, I can actually talk too long about that stuff.
We just have, I think we can take two more questions, just came in. What role does, platforms like Connection Point, I guess Fundraiser, has in auditing fundraising campaigns?
Yeah, it's a very important question, because, we are in a difficult position that we cannot audit the results, because we are not, there's no money involved in what we do for trying to audit that. So a lot of the times we require or rely on the transparency of what's going on, and the charities reporting the results and establishing that community of donors who will police the causes for us. So the community helps keep crowdfunding safe. And it may seem like that's passing the buck, but it actually is about the only practical way it can be done, and has been proven to be quite effective. There's some personal campaigns that get away with fraud. They pretend that they've got cancer or something like that. But a lot of those get called out as well. But a lot of the charity work is actually pretty well policed by the community of donors.
Does this kind of instances deter donors?
Yeah, I think it does. I think there's a concern a lot of people have, is the money actually being used for what it was said to be used for? And there's a level of trust that has to occur there, because you can't ever actually prove it, at least not at this level. There's a whole lot of discussion about whether or not blockchain technology and fintech could make it much easier to see whether or not your money was actually used for specifically the tasks that you asked. But that's a tremendous amount of overhead on everything that's not necessarily adding value to the chain yet.
There was one, I think we can take one more question. Oh, actually, we have already
Have we exceeded our
Yeah,
time?
by 2 minutes. But
Well, I
I haven't.
appreciate the chance to talk with you. This has been fabulous for me. If anyone
Thank
wants
you.
to find me, search Connection Point and Fundraiser, and I'm quite accessible on digital media. So please come and ask me questions.
Thank you, Daryl, for taking this time to explain. And I hope that all our participants here actually get a good takeaway from this and would support crowdfunding platforms.
And I hope they'll check out your writing because you talk a lot about fantastic things that are going on in fintech and the socially responsible aspects of that. So well done.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.